Governor Mizo was 52 years old, and she was tired of people underestimating her. She had spent her life being underestimated. When she applied to the colonial program, they said she was too old. When she took over as governor after the previous leader died in an accident, they said she was too soft. When she turned a struggling mining operation into one of the most profitable colonies in the outer system, they said she was just lucky dot. Now aliens had surrounded her moon with warships, and she suspected they were about to underestimate her too. How many ships? She asked her security chief, a young man named Jinho, who had served in the military before joining the colony. 32, Jinho replied, his face grim. All of them bigger than anything we have. They are demanding we transmit something called a surrender protocol. Do we have one of those? No, Governor. I checked. Mizo nodded slowly. She was standing in the colony's command center, a cramped room filled with screens and control panels. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the ice fields of Europa stretching toward the horizon. Above them, barely visible against the stars, the alien fleet waited. How long until help arrives? She asked. The nearest military vessel is 12 hours away. Earth has been notified, but a full response will take at least 2 days. 2 days. Mizo considered this. What do we have? Jinho pulled up an inventory on his screen. 3,000 people. About 200 of them have military training. We have mining equipment, construction vehicles, and emergency shelters. No weapons designed for space combat. The colony was never meant to be defended. Everything can be defended, Mizo said quietly. Everything can be a weapon. She had learned this lesson long ago, during the corporate wars that had shaped her youth. She had seen ordinary people turn mining lasers into cutting tools that could slice through armored vehicles. She had watched farmers use agricultural chemicals to create explosives. She had helped build barricades from furniture and debris that held against professional soldiers. The aliens thought they were attacking a helpless mining colony. They were wrong. Start the evacuation, Mizo ordered. All children and non-essential personnel go to the deep bunkers. Everyone else who can fight, I want armed and ready. Use whatever we have. Mining drills, cutting torches, even the heavy construction equipment. If it can hurt something, I want it pointed at the sky. Jinho stared at her. Governor, we cannot win this fight. I know. They will destroy us. Maybe. That they will know they were in a fight. Within the hour, Europa transformed. Children were hurried into deep tunnels carved into the moon's ice. Shelters designed to survive mining accidents and meteor strikes. Adults who had spent their lives operating drills and haulers suddenly found themselves learning how to use those same tools as weapons. The colony's communication array, designed for routine transmissions, was converted into a powerful broadcast system capable of reaching Earth in real time. Mizo recorded her message personally. This is Governor Mizo of Europa Colony, she said, her voice calm and steady. We are surrounded by an alien fleet that has demanded our surrender. We have refused. We have approximately 3,000 people here, including 412 children. We have no military vessels and no space-capable weapons. We have refused anyway. To anyone receiving this message, we are not asking for rescue. We are simply asking that you remember us. Remember that we did not surrender. Remember that we did not give up. Remember that when strangers came to our home and demanded that we bow, we said no. The message reached Earth within minutes. It reached every human colony within hours. And it reached Commander Yuna on her small survey ship, still being escorted by the confused patrol fleet within seconds. They did what? Yuna demanded, reading the transmission. Taiho shook his head in amazement. The Europa colony is refusing to surrender. The governor has armed the civilian population and is preparing to fight. With what? Mining equipment? It appears so. Yuna laughed, a sound that made the Luminari escort ships flicker with alarm. That woman is insane. I love her. Across human space, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Civilian transport ships changed course toward Europa. Private vessels loaded with supplies and volunteers launched from a dozen different worlds. Military commanders pushed their ships to maximum speed, knowing they might not arrive in time, but refusing to accept it. On the Council flagship, Commander Veth watched the human response with growing confusion. They are coming to help, Veth reported to High Arbiter Molt via secure channel. Hundreds of ships. Most of them are not military. They are cargo vessels, passenger transports, even personal craft. They have no chance against our fleet. They are coming anyway. Why? Molt asked. I do not know. The humans do not explain their behavior. They simply act. On Europa, the alien fleet moved into position, their weapons charged, their shields activated. They prepared to demonstrate the consequences of defiance, just as they had done to thousands of species before. Governor Mizzo stood in the command center, watching the alien ships descend. Around her, miners and engineers clutched improvised weapons. Families huddled in bunkers below. The entire colony held its breath. She thought about her children, grown now and living on other worlds. She thought about her grandchildren, who would grow up in a universe where humanity had faced impossible odds. She thought about all the stories she had heard as a child, about ancestors who had faced invaders and occupiers and tyrants. None of those ancestors had surrendered either. The alien commander sent a final message. This is your last opportunity. Transmit your surrender protocol or face destruction. Mizzo walked to the communication console. She activated the broadcast system, ensuring her words would be heard by every human ship racing toward Europa, by every colony in the outer system, by Earth itself. You came to our home, she said, her voice steady as stone. You threatened our children. You demanded that we kneel. Here is our answer. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We are 3,000 people with mining equipment against your warships. We know we cannot win. We do not care. If you want Europa, you will have to take it from our bodies. And when you are done, when the last of us is dead, you will look at what you have taken and realize that it cost you more than it was worth. That is the human surrender protocol. It is the only one we have. She paused, then added, Now get off my moon or come down here and try to take it. Silence fell across the communication channels. Across human space, millions of people listened and waited. On hundreds of ships, humans prepared for a fight they knew they could not win but refused to avoid. And on the Council flagship, Commander Veth made a decision that would change galactic history. All ships, Veth ordered. Hold position. Commander? Asked a subordinate. We need to report to the Council. This situation has evolved. As the alien fleet held position, as human ships raced through space, as Governor Mezzo stood ready to die for her people, something fundamental shifted in the universe. The Intergalactic Council had discovered that some species could not be frightened into submission. Some species had nothing but stubbornness and love, and that was enough. The Grand Chamber of the Intergalactic Council was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated at the exact center of the galaxy, a massive sphere of metal and crystal that could hold representatives from all 847 member species. Today, it was full. High Arbiter Molt sat at the center of the chamber on a throne carved from the heart of a dead star. Molt was old beyond measure, a being of living shadow and pale light who had guided the council for 3,000 cycles. In all that time, Molt had never called an emergency session until today. Explain, Molt said, the ancient voice echoing through the chamber. Explain how a species barely 3 centuries into space travel has caused this much confusion. Commander Veth stood before the assembled representatives, crystalline form flickering with embarrassment. Around the chamber, beings of every shape and size watched with interest. The molluscan, massive slug-like creatures who communicated through chemical signals, oozed with curiosity. The feathered ones, tall bird-like beings from the rim worlds, ruffled their plumage nervously. The stone mines, ancient artificial intelligences housed in asteroid-sized computers, hummed with data processing. The humans received our standard greeting, Veth began. They acknowledged receipt of the message. They asked questions about our organization. And then they requested instructions on how to surrender, claiming they did not have such a protocol. A ripple of disbelief spread through the chamber. Impossible, said the molluscan delegate, leaving a trail of skeptical slime. All intelligent species develop surrender protocols. It is basic survival instinct. When faced with overwhelming force, a species must have a way to signal submission. Otherwise, they would simply fight until extinction. The humans appear to lack this instinct, Veth said. Then they are defective, declared one of the feathered ones. A genetic error. They should have died out long ago. And yet they survived, Veth replied. They not only survived, they thrived. They spread from their home world to 12 other planets. They built ships, stations, and colonies. They are, by any measure, a successful species. They simply do not understand why they should surrender to strangers. High Arbiter Molt raised one shadowy hand, and the chamber fell silent. Show us their world, Molt commanded. Show us these humans. The center of the chamber filled with light is the Council's vast intelligence. NETWORK displayed everything known about humanity. Images appeared of Earth, a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Cities covered its surface. Ships filled its skies. And everywhere, there were humans. They were small creatures, soft, fragile. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. They could not fly, could not breathe underwater, could not survive in vacuum. By every measure, they should have been prey animals, food for larger and stronger species. But the images told a different story. The Council watched as humans, hunted creatures 10 times their size. They watched as humans survived in deserts, in frozen wastelands, and jungles so deadly that other species avoided them entirely. They watched as humans fought each other in wars of staggering brutality, destroying cities and burning continents, only to rebuild and fight. Again, they are insane, whispered the molluscan. Delegate, they are persistent, corrected one of the stone minds. My analysis indicates that humans have survived at least 6 extinction-level events. Each time, they refused to die. They adapted. They endured. They continued. High Arbiter Molt studied the images with ancient eyes. They fight each other constantly. How have they not destroyed themselves? They nearly have, Veth said. Multiple times. They developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet. They built enough of these weapons to destroy themselves several times over. And then they pointed these weapons at each other and waited. Waited for what? For someone to surrender. No one did. So they simply continued waiting, building more weapons while also building schools and hospitals and art museums. They are very confusing. On Earth, Commander Yuna had no idea that she had become the subject of an intergalactic debate. She had returned home to Bizon, to the small apartment she shared with her husband, Junho, and their daughter Hana. The alien encounter had been filed in her report, forwarded to the appropriate authorities, and mostly forgotten. Junho, a professor of ancient history at the local university, found the whole situation hilarious. They want us to surrender? He said, laughing as he prepared dinner. Just like that? "Oh, we are aliens. Please give up everything and do what we say." "That appears to be the idea," Una replied, helping Hannah with her homework at the kitchen table. "Have they met humans? Have they read any history at all?" "I do not think they have. They seemed very surprised when I asked questions instead of surrendering." Junho shook his head in amazement. He was a kind man with gentle eyes and a deep love of stories. He spent his days teaching young people about the past, about the empires that had risen and fallen, about the battles that had shaped civilization. "Do you know what I teach my students?" he said. "I teach them about Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held a pass against an army of millions. I teach them about the Korean resistance, when our ancestors fought for decades against occupation. I teach them about all the times that humans faced impossible odds and said no. Not because they thought they could win, but because surrender was simply not something they could accept." Una nodded. She had heard these stories since childhood. They were part of her, woven into her bones. "The aliens will learn," she said. Eventually, back in the Grand Chamber, High Arbiter Molt had reached a decision. "We will test them," Molt announced. "We will send a small force to one of their outer colonies. Nothing major. Just enough to trigger whatever surrender mechanism they possess. It must exist. It must simply be buried deep in their psychology. We will find it." The chamber murmured with agreement. This was sensible. This was logical. Every species had a breaking point. The humans would be no different. "Choose a target," Molt commanded. "Something small. Something isolated. Something that will make them understand their situation." The Council's intelligence network identified a suitable target, a mining colony on Europa, one of the moons of a gas giant in the human home system. 3,000 humans lived there, extracting valuable minerals from the ice. It was far from Earth, poorly defended, and entirely dependent on supply ships for survival. It was perfect. As the Council fleet prepared to move. As ships gathered and weapons charged, no one thought to check the records more carefully. No one noticed that Europa had been founded by refugees from a failed colony, people who had already lost one home and sworn never to lose another. No one noticed that the colony's governor was a woman named Mizo, a grandmother who had survived 2 corporate wars and raised 3 children, alone after her husband died in a mining accident. No one noticed, because no one thought it mattered. They would learn. The Intergalactic Council had ruled the known universe for 12,000 cycles. They were old. They were powerful. They had seen thousands of species rise from their home worlds, discover fire, build cities, and eventually reach for the stars. And every single one of those species, without exception, had learned the same lesson when they met the Council's patrol fleet. Surrender. It was not a cruel system. The Council did not enjoy violence. They simply believed in order. When a new species achieved faster than light travel, a patrol fleet would find them, send them the standard greeting, and wait for the surrender signal. The new species would then join the Council as junior members. They would follow Council laws. They would pay Council taxes. They would bow to Council authority. In 12,000 cycles, this had never failed. Not once. The patrol fleet commander Veth was a luminari, a species made of living crystal that sparkled with inner light. Veth had performed first contact missions for 200 cycles. The job was boring, but important. Find a new species. Send the greeting. Receive the surrender. File the paperwork. Move on. When Veth's sensors detected a small ship drifting at the edge of the Orion Arm, the commander felt no concern. The ship was tiny, barely larger than a transport shuttle. Its design was crude but functional. The energy readings suggested a civilization, perhaps 300 years into space travel. A baby species. Nothing special. Veth ordered the fleet into standard formation and sent the greeting. Transmission. On board the human vessel Sunflower, Commander Yuna was having a bad day. The coffee machine had broken 3 days ago. The navigation computer kept making strange noises. And now, according to her navigator Taiho, a fleet of alien ships had surrounded them and was sending some kind of message. "Put it on screen," Yuna said. Rubbing her tired eyes, the message appeared in perfect Korean, which was strange because Yuna was fairly certain aliens should not know Korean. The translation technology was impressive. The content of the message was less impressive. "Attention unidentified vessel," the message read. "You have entered space governed by the Intergalactic Council. You will immediately transmit your surrender protocol and acknowledge the supreme authority of the Council. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your vessel. You have 1 standard cycle to respond." Yuna read the message twice. Then she read it a 3rd time. Then she turned to Taiho. "Is this real?" she asked. Taiho, a young man with messy hair and a talent for remaining calm in strange situations, checked his instruments. "The ships are real. The message is real. I count 47 vessels out there, Commander. All of them have weapons pointed at us. And they want us to surrender? That appears to be the request." Yuna laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was the kind of laugh that escapes when something is so absurd that the brain cannot process it properly. "Surrender to what?" she said. "We just met them. We do not even know who they are. And they want us to just give up and do whatever they say?" Taiho shrugged. "I think that is the general idea. Do we have a surrender protocol? I do not think so. I checked the manual. There is a section on first contact, a section on emergency procedures, and a section on what to do if the toilet breaks. Nothing about surrendering to space bureaucrats." Yuna stared at the fleet of ships surrounding her tiny vessel. They were beautiful in a cold, threatening way. Each ship was larger than the Sunflower by a factor of 10. Their weapon systems glowed with barely contained energy. Any one of them could destroy her ship in a heartbeat. She should have been afraid. She knew she should have been afraid. But Yuna had grown up in Bazan, a port city that had survived wars, occupations, and economic disasters. Her grandmother had told her stories about ancestors who had faced impossible odds and refused to bend. Her father had been a fisherman who sailed into storms. That would have terrified lesser men. Fear was a luxury that Yuna's family had never been able to afford. "Send them a response," she told Taiho. "What should I say?" "Tell them we do not have a surrender button. Ask them to send instructions. And ask them if they have any coffee." Taiho blinked. "Coffee? The machine is broken. Maybe aliens have coffee. It is worth asking." Taiho sent the message. On the command deck of the Luminary flagship, Commander Veth received the human response. The crystalline being read it several times, convinced there must be a translation error. But the message remained the same. "They do not have a surrender protocol," Veth said to the subordinate standing nearby. "They are asking for instructions on how to surrender. And they want to know if we have something called coffee." The subordinate, a young luminary named Prex, flickered with confusion. Perhaps they did not understand the message? The translation was perfect. I verified it myself. Then perhaps they are defective? A damaged ship with damaged crew? Veth considered this. It was possible. Space travel was dangerous. Ships sometimes suffered accidents that affected the mental state of their crews. But the human commander had seemed perfectly rational. Her message was clear and coherent. She simply did not appear to understand why she should surrender. Veth sent another message, this time with more detail. The message explained the history of the Council. It described the thousands of species that had joined peacefully. It listed the benefits of membership and the consequences of resistance. It was, in Veth's opinion, a very persuasive document. The human response arrived within minutes. "Thank you for the information," it read. "Your organization sounds very organized. However, we are just a small survey ship on a routine mission. We are not authorized to make decisions about surrendering our entire species. You will need to contact Earth for that. Also, you did not answer our question about coffee. This is becoming urgent." That felt something that Luminari rarely experienced: frustration. "Contact their home world," the commander ordered. "Perhaps their leaders will be more reasonable." But deep in the ancient patterns that govern Veth's crystalline mind, a small voice whispered a warning. In 12,000 cycles, no species had ever responded to the surrender demand with questions about coffee. Something about these humans was different. Something was very, very wrong. On the Sunflower, Yuna finished her shift and handed command to Taiho. She went to her small cabin, lay down on her bunk, and thought about the alien fleet outside. She was not worried. She probably should have been worried. But Yuna had learned long ago that worry was useless. Problems were meant to be solved, not feared. And this problem, whatever it turned out to be, would be solved like all the others, with stubbornness, with cleverness, and hopefully, eventually, with coffee. She closed her eyes and slept peacefully while 47 alien warships surrounded her tiny vessel, their commanders growing more confused with every passing hour. The Council fleet withdrew from Europa without firing a single shot. Commander Veth claimed it was a tactical decision, a need to reassess the situation. The truth was simpler. Veth had looked at the humans preparing to die rather than surrender. And something had broken inside the ancient commander's crystalline mind. For the first time in 200 cycles of service, Veth had felt doubt. The request for a diplomatic meeting came from both sides almost simultaneously. The Council wanted to understand these strange creatures who defied all logic. The humans wanted to know why anyone would expect them to surrender to strangers. Both sides were confused. Both sides wanted answers. They met on Station Prime, in a chamber designed for negotiation rather than judgment. The human delegation arrived in a small shuttle that looked fragile and temporary compared to the massive council vessels. They wore simple clothes and carried no visible weapons. They looked, to council observers, like prey animals walking willingly into a predator's den. Ambassador Dahan led the human delegation. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. He had been a soldier once, then a diplomat, then a teacher. Now he was the voice of humanity in the greatest negotiation his species had ever faced. High Arbiter Molt received him personally. "You puzzle us," Molt said, the ancient voice echoing in the chamber. "We have governed this galaxy for 12,000 cycles. We have brought peace to countless species. We have ended wars, prevented extinctions, and created a civilization that spans the stars. And you refuse to join us." "We do not refuse to join you," Dohan replied calmly. "We refuse to surrender to you. These are different things." "Explain." Dohan took a moment to gather his thoughts. Around him, representatives from dozens of species watched and listened. They had all surrendered once. They had all accepted council authority. They wanted to understand why humans would not. "You asked us to submit," Dohan began, "to acknowledge your supreme authority, to follow your laws and obey your commands. You asked us to do this simply because you are stronger than us, because you have more ships and more weapons and more history. This is how civilizations are built," Molt said. "The strong lead. The weak follow. It is natural. Perhaps for other species, not for us. Why?" Dohan smiled slightly. It was not a threatening expression, but several council representatives found themselves uneasy anyway. There was something in that smile, something old and patient and completely unafraid. "Let me tell you about a place called Thermopylae," Dohan said. It was a narrow pass on our home world, 3,000 years ago. A massive army came to conquer our ancestors. They had more soldiers than anyone could count. They had the greatest military force our world had ever seen. And at Thermopylae, 300 soldiers stood in their way. 300 against an army? Molt said. That is suicide. Yes, yes. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. They held that pass for 3 days, killing thousands of enemies before the last of them fell. They did not win. They could not win. But they showed our people something important, that death was not the worst thing. That surrender was worse. That there are things worth dying for. Molt processed this information slowly. And this inspired your species? It became part of who we are. We tell this story to our children. We tell them about Thermopylae and Stalingrad, and 100 other battles where humans faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Not because we are brave or foolish, but because we understand something that perhaps other species do not. What is that? That the universe does not care about us. That nothing is given to us freely. That everything we have, every moment of peace, every child who grows up safe, every home we build, was earned by people who refuse to give up. We cannot surrender because surrender means losing everything those people died for. It means telling our ancestors that their sacrifice was meaningless. It means teaching our children that their freedom depends on the mercy of strangers. The chamber fell silent. Molt, who had lived for 3,000 cycles and seen empires rise and fall, felt something entirely unfamiliar, a glimmer of understanding. You would truly die rather than submit? Molt asked. We would try everything else first, Dohan said. We would negotiate. We would bargain. We would look for any solution that preserved our freedom. But if all else failed, yes, we would die, and we would make sure our enemies remembered it. This is inefficient. This is illogical. This causes unnecessary suffering. Yes, Dohan agreed. It does. But it also ensures that we remain free. It ensures that anyone who wants to control us must be willing to destroy us completely. And that cost, that price, is usually too high. Most enemies give up before we do. Molt considered this for a long moment. The ancient being had seen thousands of species join the council. Every single one had surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. It was the logical choice. It was the rational choice. It was the choice that any intelligent being would make. But humans were not purely rational beings. They were creatures of emotion and story and memory. They carried their ancestors inside them, whispering lessons about sacrifice and defiance. They looked at death and saw not an ending but a message. A declaration that some things mattered more than survival. It was, Molt realized, exactly what the Council had lost over 12,000 cycles of peace. The member species had become comfortable, safe, and compliant. They had forgotten what it meant to care about something more than their own existence. You are very small, Molt said finally. Your species is young. Your technology is primitive. By every measure, you should be nothing more than another junior member of our council, grateful for our protection. And yet here we are, Dohan said, negotiating as equals. Yes, here you are. Molt rose from the ancient throne, towering over the human ambassador. For a moment, it seemed like a threat. Then Molt did something no High Arbiter had done in 3,000 cycles, bowed slightly in acknowledgement. We have much to learn from each other, Molt said. Perhaps it is time the Council remembered what it means to believe in something worth dying for. Dohan returned the bow. And perhaps it is time humanity learned that strength can come from cooperation as well as resistance. We do not want to be your enemies. We want to be your partners. Partners, Molt repeated, as if tasting a new word. Yes, I think that might be possible. In the observation gallery above the chamber, Representatives from 847 species watched in amazement. For the first time in history, the Council had met a species it could not dominate. And instead of destroying that species, the Council was choosing to learn from them. Something fundamental had changed. Something that would reshape the galaxy for millennia to come. And it had all started because a small survey ship did not have a surrender button. The vote took 3 days. 847 species debating the fate of humanity, arguing over what to do with creatures who refused to follow the rules that had governed the galaxy for 12,000 cycles. Some demanded isolation. Build a wall around human space, they said. Let them have their little corner of the galaxy. Monitor them. Contain them. Never let them spread their dangerous ideas to other species. The molluscan delegate led this faction, arguing that human unpredictability made them too dangerous to integrate. Others demanded war. Destroy them now, they said, before they grow stronger. Before they infect other species with their defiance. Before they teach others that surrender is not the only option. The Crystalline Collective supported this view, pointing to human history as evidence of their violent nature. But High Arbiter Molt had a different proposal. For 12,000 cycles, Molt addressed the Grand Chamber. We have maintained peace through the threat of overwhelming force. Every species that joined us did so because they calculated the odds and chose survival. This is logical. This is reasonable. This is what any rational being would do. Molt paused, ancient eyes sweeping across the assembled representatives. But logic and reason are not enough. We have created peace, yes, but we have also created stagnation. Our member species have become comfortable. They have forgotten what it means to believe in something greater than their own survival. They have forgotten passion, sacrifice, and the fierce joy of fighting for something that matters. The chamber murmured with confusion. This was not the speech anyone had expected. The humans remind us of what we have lost, Molt continued. They are small and weak and fragile. They have no natural advantages. And yet they have spread across their stars because they refuse to give up. They fight for their families, their homes, their freedom. They carry their ancestors inside them and feel the weight of their descendants watching. This is not weakness. This is strength of a kind we have forgotten. Molt raised one shadowy hand. I propose that we do not conquer the humans or isolate them. I propose that we learn from them. That we invite them to join us not as subjects, but as partners. That we allow their strange ideas to spread among our species and remind us all what it means to care about something worth dying for. The vote was close. 312 species voted for isolation. 219 voted for war. But 316 voted for partnership. For something unprecedented in the history of the Council. Humanity would join the Intergalactic Council as equals. The news reached Earth within hours. It reached Commander Yuna while she was finally drinking coffee, having traded some human art to the Luminari escorts in exchange for supplies. It reached Governor Mizzo on Europa, where she was overseeing the repair of mining equipment that had been hastily converted into weapons. It reached Ambassador Dawn on his return flight home, where he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction before worrying about everything that came next. And it reached a small apartment in Bizen, where Junho was reading the news while his daughter Hana played on the floor. We did it, he said softly. We actually did it. Yuna arrived home that evening, tired but happy. She had been traveling for weeks, first dealing with the patrol fleet, then testifying before various human authorities, then being celebrated as the woman who had accidentally started a revolution. All she wanted was to sit with her family and remember what she had been fighting for. Hannah ran to greet her at the door. The child was 8 years old, with her mother's stubborn chin and her father's curious eyes. She had been following the news as best she could, picking up pieces of the story from her parents and teachers. Mom, she said, pulling at Yuna's hand. Did we really tell the aliens no? Yuna knelt down to look her daughter in the eyes. We did, baby. We told them no, and they were okay with it? Eventually. It took them a while to understand. Understand what? Yuna thought about how to explain. How to summarize everything that had happened, everything it meant, in terms an 8-year-old could understand. You know the stories Daddy tells you? She said. About our ancestors? About how they never gave up, even when things were hard? Hannah nodded. Well, the aliens did not have those stories. They forgot what it means to fight for something you love. So when they met us, when they saw that we would not surrender just because they were bigger and stronger, they were confused. They did not understand why we would risk everything instead of just doing what they said. Why did we risk everything? Yuna smiled and pulled her daughter close. Because some things are more important than being safe. Because we wanted you to grow up free. Because we wanted you to know that nobody gets to decide your future except you. Those things matter more than anything, even more than staying alive. Hannah considered this with the serious expression children wear when thinking about big ideas. So we were brave? We were stubborn, Yuna said, laughing. Very, very stubborn. But yes, I suppose that is a kind of brave. In the grand chamber of the Intergalactic Council, workers were installing something new above the entrance to the human archives. A plaque inscribed with the first words humanity had spoken to the galaxy. Words that had begun as confusion and become a declaration, a philosophy, a promise. The plaque read, "We do not have a surrender button." Below it, in smaller text, was a translation note, human expression indicating that capitulation to hostile demands is not considered an acceptable response, regardless of circumstances or odds of success. See also, stubbornness, defiance, love. High Arbiter Molt visited the new installation and stood before it for a long time. The ancient being had lived for 3,000 cycles, had seen empires rise and fall, had guided the council through countless crises and challenges, but nothing had ever surprised Molt quite like the humans. They will change everything, Molt said softly. Their ideas will spread. Their defiance will inspire. In 1,000 cycles, the galaxy will be unrecognizable. Molt's advisor, a young luminary named Veth, who had been promoted after the Europa incident, flickered with concern. Is that not dangerous? Perhaps. Perhaps it is exactly what we need. We've been stagnant for too long, focused on order and control rather than growth and passion. The humans remind us that civilization is not just about survival. It is about meaning, about believing in something greater than ourselves. Molt turned to face Veth. They do not have a surrender button, the High Arbiter said, but they have something far more powerful. They have love. Love for their families, their homes, their future. And they will fight for that love until their last breath, against any odds, against any enemy. It sounds exhausting, Veth said. Molt made a sound that might have been laughter. Yes, I suspect it is. But it is also magnificent. On Earth, in a small apartment in Bizon, Yuna tucked her daughter into bed and told her the story of how humanity had faced the stars and refused to kneel. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed from parents to children across 100 worlds. And at its heart, always, was a simple truth, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more, that love is stronger than logic, that some things are worth any price, and that humans, for all their flaws, would never, ever give up on the things they loved. Not ever.